Gwed everyone, Kajima Tosh Sheev, and welcome back to the Inline G Flute podcast with me, your host, motherfucking Inline G. Another episode with no episode number in the intro. The reason for that, I have cooked the goose here, lads. I have no fucking clue where we are anymore. I've lost it. But what I do know is this episode has been a long time in the making. If it wasn't for Bayer Leverkusen being the best team in European football, I would have been over to London weeks or months ago to make this happen in person. But for now, you'll have to settle with an online version. But I do promise a sequel someday with pints in England is very much so on the cards. Today's guest is someone who has not only supported this podcast since day one, but who also has provided much of its inspiration. You've all heard me talk about the Talking Flutes podcast on here. It's been running for nearly 7 years and is the gold standard flute podcasts. I once referred to it as the Paolo Maldini of flute podcasts. Consistent excellence and reliability with more than a splash of style and elegance. For my American friends, go Google Paolo Maldini. You're losing out with your stupid sports. It's a podcast that I listen to a lot, and genuinely without it, Inline G wouldn't exist. However, my guest this week isn't just the co-host of Talking Flutes. He's had many lives, including a soloist, orchestral musician, recording artist, qualified clinical hypnotherapist, creator of thehappyflutist.com. He's on the board of trustees for the Whirlwind Music Charitable Foundation and has worked with Sankyo, Miyazawa, and now Trevor James. It is, of course, who else is it going to be? It is, of course, Jean-Paul Wright. This episode is packed with anecdotes and embarrassing stories, which I adore, as well as tips for musicians' mental health, comparisons to sport, the flute making market, and most notably, finally, the origin of the Red Sox. So regular listeners, you know the crack. Skip ahead now for the episode. Everyone else, bear with me just a moment. The Inline G podcast is free and always will be free. That's a guarantee. However, if you wish to donate to the podcast, you can now do so through the Patreon. On the screen now is the address, and for the audio listeners, it is patreon.com/the Inline G Flute podcast. It costs €5 or dollars or pounds per month, and with that, you're keeping this podcast alive. You get 4 episodes a month, and that's the price of a pint you're going to be donating. So if you listen to every episode and you think, fuck, if I saw Gareth in the pub, I'd buy him a beer to say thank you, you can now do so. I do everything around here on my own. Marketing, graphic design, research, scripts, audio production, video production, you name it, I do it. Becoming a patron helps generate a regular income for this podcast, meaning I can turn down other work to focus on it. It also lets me travel to meet the best flute players in the world. As a thank you, you guys get to ask these people questions and you get access to the episodes earlier than everyone else. So if you can afford it, sign up over there. You can unsubscribe at any time. I jump in and out of so many Patreon for podcasts. Instantly, easy, no fees. If you can afford it, it helps a huge amount. And thank you so much to the people that are in there. If you can't afford it, someone else is paying so that you can listen for free. It's grand. So here is this week's Inline G Flute podcast with Jean-Paul Wright.
There's so many stories. Kat Ryan, she threatened to unmask me.
I heard it. I listened to both episodes with Katrina, and she has said in both of them she wants to do an episode interviewing you. So, man, you have to do it.
Well, actually, because she wants to ask why I always wear red socks. I've only worn red socks since I was 18.
Right. Yes. Can I ask that? I have been dying to know about this as well.
Oh, really?
But should I? Yeah. Are you kidding? This is one of the things. Okay, for anyone who's listening and doesn't know about Talking Flutes, first of all, this is really important. Talking Flutes has been running for quite a while now. It's the flute podcast, in my opinion. It's the OG. It's the Paolo Maldini, as we were just saying, of flute podcast. It is the OG. But throughout, I haven't listened to all the episodes. I've got, I'd say, a good 50%. I jump in and out, and you constantly hint that you're going to tell the story someday of these Red Sox, and you never do. And I've never heard it yet, and you've teased me for years now.
Well, as it's you, shall I just go? Shall I just go
please, for it? Please.
Okay.
Years have been waiting.
Right. So, I'm not exactly tall. I'm 5'9".
Okay.
5'9.5" or 5'10" in photographs, because you can often see me going up a bit on heels.
Yeah. Okay.
My best friend at school, David, was 6'4", rugby player, seriously good looking, great smile. Okay. And so we used to go to parties each weekend when we were 16 and 17. I would end up walking home by myself.
Okay. No,
because, he was good looking dude and the girls liked him.
Yeah.
And then one weekend, I turned up at a party with him, and this girl came over and said, "Were you at the party, at Tim's party last week?" And I went, "Yeah, you're the guy with the red socks." And I went, I've been noticed. I've been noticed.
So,
and I've only ever worn red socks since
because of that one occasion.
That I know how shallow that is, but a lot of, I mean, Mr. Miyazawa, the president of the Miyazawa Flute Company, he always pulls my trousers up when he sees me, just to see if I've got the red socks on.
That's great. I don't know what I was expecting. I actually thought it was going to be some kind of like superstition.
No, I don't have those. But no,
it comes right back to a girl. That's the best, man.
That's a girl.
That's it. That's way better an answer than I could have ever hoped for. That is great. That's an exclusive here. There we are. Finally, we've got to the bottom of that.
Yeah, sorry, Kat. Sorry, Kat.
Does Kat know outside of the podcast and she wanted to interview? Have you just never told her?
I think I've told her, but she wanted me to tell it publicly because it will show how shallow an individual I am because I'm still doing something. And I have 47 pairs of red socks in my drawer.
What? All 47. The same brand? Or do you go with different brands?
Different brands because you can't always find them. And there was, my wife bought me a pair of pink socks and I didn't notice. And I got up really early in the morning and put the socks on out my sock drawer, and they were pink. And I felt odd all day.
You didn't feel right, but you didn't notice they were pink.
Not until someone pointed them out to me.
Okay.
Fuchsia.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure on that. But that is, I don't know what I was expecting from that story, but it wasn't that, and I'm delighted with that. You can be as shallow as you want on this podcast. I'll out-shallow you, don't worry. I've done all kinds of horrific things. To be honest, I think most of my career has been on the fact that I wanted to play flute to make sure I could stay in the senior part of the flute band because the girl I fancied was playing there. Most of my practice has been because I fancied a girl. So,
that's why I started the flute.
Oh, tell me. Go, hit me with this.
I started as a percussionist and stood at the back, and I wasn't the cool percussionist because there was, in the county concert band, Bedfordshire, the cool guy was the guy that played the drum kit during the breaks. And the young girls would go up and they'd be swooning. And I was on the timpani, and I would look down and the whole flute section, 12 flutes were girls.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I'm in the wrong place.
I'm learning the flute.
So I started learning the flute, and because of the way my personality is, I get quite addicted to things. I learnt it quite quickly, and when it came to auditioning, it was the Wombles theme.
Oh yeah, also you have to explain the Wombles a little bit because a lot of this podcast goes out in North America, and I don't think they're familiar with the Wombles, are they?
No, I don't think they are. They are little furry animals that live on Wimbledon Common, and they had a very catchy theme tune, which was quite hard to read when you're young.
Okay.
Yeah,
there's a bit of syncopation in that, it feels like, yeah.
There was. And when they were doing the auditions for County Concert Band, Symphonic Band, they put that up to see where you'd sit.
Okay.
But because I knew the Wombles and how it went, it was almost like a sight read perfectly.
Yeah, because you were a big Wombles fan.
I was. So straight in at the end chair. Straight in as number one.
And that was because of the Wombles.
Because of the Wombles,
yeah. Man, I find out a lot about you today. I'm really here for it. They don't do the Wombles anymore. The Wombles are gone, aren't they? We don't have them anymore.
They're gone, yeah. Yeah, those are the days when I thought playing fast was cool. I thought playing fast was what everyone would hear. And I'd walk around the concert hall playing Carmen Venice, and they'd be, oh, look, can you play that for me? And then you grow up.
It is cool.
And then you grow up, don't you? And you realise, nah.
I was the worst for that. Because you'll be a little bit familiar with the flute band system as well. Yeah. The flute bands, they love like an operatic fantasy. They love it. They love the cheesier the better for that kind of stuff. And I was brought up on all that. Playing it when I was 11, I'd say 30% of the notes were there. The rest were just pure confidence. Blast or pure Irish confidence got me through the rest of it. And when I went to music college, you're going to have to play some of those notes, Gareth. You can't leave all of them out. All I played was operatic fantasies, but I haven't lost that love for them yet. I still adore Carnival of Venice, the Jenin variations. Oh,
yeah.
Oh. Well, let me pick up a little bit from there, actually, because I want to talk. So I did do a little bit of research and find a few interviews with you where I could study or see where you studied and all that kind of stuff. And I was so curious. So you studied with George Crozier back in the
Yeah,
day. Can you
yeah,
tell me a bit
bless him.
about him? Because that's not a name I've heard very much. My grandfather would have spoke about him as well, and my uncle would have spoke about him, but I haven't heard that name in a while.
Well, what I'll have to do is just go back a little bit to tell you
Do.
why I ended up with George Crozier, and then what happened after George Crozier, because I ended up with Jim Dower. But
Yeah.
so when I was much younger, I wanted to go and study in London, and there was a young professor there, Jim Dower, at the Trinity School of Music at the time, really, really young, played on a gold
Yeah.
Sheridan flute, which
Yeah.
I adored. And I wanted to go and study with Wibb. And so the story goes, so I had to go and do an interview, one of these interviews with Jim. And I walked in and he said, "What are you going to play for me?" So his partner, who was a pianist,
Yeah.
so I'm going to do the E-Bear, first movement. So he sat back and went, "Okay." So I gave the partner the music, and we played the E-Bear first movement, and which is my favourite concerto to this day. But and I'm not sure we'll cover that. But at the
Okay.
end of it, he said, "How do you think that went?" Now I was a cocky 17-year-old. I said, "I think that went really well. I think I really like that." He said, "Now play me the middle movement.
Uh-huh.
Make me weep. Make my hairs on the back of my head." And I went, "What? What? Make your hairs? What's that?" And anyway, so I couldn't. I just didn't know what he meant because all I'd ever wanted, I was a scaloid. All I ever wanted to do was play fast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I studied with Jim for about a year on and off. And then I said, "Could I have a consultation with Wibb?" Because I sort of fancied sort of studying with Wibb. Because in those days, I thought I could get into the academy. I was, is what the way a confident young boy coming from
Yeah.
a small place in Bedfordshire where you always sat on
Nice.
the end. And so I went to. So I did my prep with Jim. And Jim said, "Wibb will be really honest with you, because that is what Wibb's like. He
Yeah.
won't necessarily be horrible, but he'll be really honest." So I had my consultation. I was playing, and he wanted to mess around with the flute, and, "Oh, what you playing?" And "Oh, no, more than this." And and he started playing it. It sounded like a trumpet and all that. And at the
Yeah.
end of it, he said, "Do you know, you're an interesting flute player, but you're not a good one." Ouch!
Oh.
Ouch!
Oh, that's
Ouch!
horrific.
No, because I think for the first time in my life, it was my parents, my grandmother, my teacher at those days. I mean, Jim was always honest, but I had it from Wibb, somebody that I sort of adored as a flute player.
Respected. Yeah.
Yeah. So he said, "I tell you what." So I said, "Oh, I've sort of." He said, "What do you do?" And so I said, "Well, I'm moving down because I'm a runner. So I'm moving down to London because I was running for Belgrave Harriers at the time, and
Oh,
I,
wow.
yeah, I'm sure you'll touch on this because it's part of the whole of me." And I said, "I fancy going to music college," and he said, "I wouldn't do that." He said, "Have you ever thought about joining the army?" And I sort of nearly spat my coffee out. "What? Army?" He said, "Yeah, I was in the Scots Guards, National Service." He said, "If you go in the Guards regiments, if you can get in, because you're not very tall, but if you can get in the Guards regiments, you don't do soldier stuff. You just play music all day.
Yeah.
You do a couple of hours rehearsal in the morning. You may do state
Well,
occasions, but you don't live in barracks. You don't do fire guns or assault courses. You just do music." And he said,
well.
"Actually, a lot of them Guards musicians are playing the pits or in orchestras." So I went along for my interview, and I got in, and I was the smallest person in the Grenadier Guards band for the 9 years I was in.
Wow.
And the reason I stayed so long is just because, well, A, was my running, but B, I had the easiest job in the world of playing in beautiful places, touring the world, playing with some wonderful
Yeah.
musicians. But I had to do a year at Nella Hall School of Music. Nella Hall in Surrey, it's right next to Twickenham Rugby Ground in those days. And George Crozier was the professor.
Ah, okay.
So he was the professor, and you had to get George in the mornings when you had lessons. Because
Okay.
if you got him in the afternoon, he'd been down the pub and had a few sherbets. So he'd been on the sauce,
So you
and
want to get him early, yeah.
and he'd fall asleep. But he did, he'd literally fall asleep. But what he taught me that my embouchure was far too tight. Jim had been trying to teach me for ages and I just couldn't do it. But what George had a really floppy offset like that,
Okay.
and his flute was down.
Yeah.
And he took me back to the old Moyes tone development through interpretation stuff. He took me back to basics. He took me back to listening to the sound in that moment and not thinking, God, this is boring, let's move on.
Yeah.
So he was probably really instrumental, and I think he was from one of the Irish flute bands. I can't remember which one it might have been, Ballymena or something.
I think it is, yeah, because he was from, I think he was from Belfast himself originally,
Yes.
but then he moved out. So yeah, I need to check exactly which one. Again, my grandfather would know that. I probably should have asked him. But yeah.
And so it came to the end of the year, and there was all these talented musicians there. And I said, I'd like to enter the competition because Wibb won it. It's called the Cousins Memorial, and you get this solid silver engraved medal, which means you're the best musician or deemed
In
the
the
best
world.
musician in the military field. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I said, what do I play? And he said, I'll tell you what you're to play to win it, guaranteed to win it, is the chaminade. But I said, oh, that's easy. And he went, really? And then, so for 3 months, he took me back to basics on the chaminade to understand the beauty and the construct of this piece. And I went in and I won the competition, got the medal.
Seriously.
Yeah, so my claim to fame is I'm on the medal board, Wibb 1960s something, and I am 1983. So there's 2 flute players on this board.
Wow. I have learned so much about you today. I didn't know that either. I didn't even know you were in that, in the
Yeah.
military music and stuff. I had no idea. Wow.
So yeah,
Because,
come on.
sorry, go ahead.
No,
Go
so
ahead, go ahead.
Carnival in Venice and the E-Bear was what I always played when I was in the band. So if we'd go
That's
somewhere and we're doing a concert, it was always Carnival in Venice. They would throw up, and you okay playing it? Yeah. There is a YouTube.
As a soloist.
There is a YouTube version of me playing it, and it's far too fast. And because my flute I used to play so sharp, my top E is so sharp it becomes an F at the end. So the octave is in tune.
Hey, there you are. I haven't seen that video. I'm gonna have to go looking that up now as well. I'm gonna dive down that rabbit hole later. Is it easy to find, or is it hidden away in the corners of the internet?
It's easy to find on YouTube.
Okay, I will.
So George was the first person. Jim had tried to with the E-Bear, but I think I was a bit too young. And joining the army at the time made me I left home. I left my cosseted world where my mum and my grandma thought I was the best person in the world. You know, it's so what George taught me was you've got to be able to understand love. You've got to have been loved, and you've got to love, and you've got to miss love. And he would ask me about what upsets me, and then he would get me to bring that image back when I was playing sad music.
Wow.
So, and he was the first one really that got me to understand that as a overconfident 18-year-old, that embracing weaknesses as a musician, being vulnerable as a musician, makes you stand out differently to those that are pure robots.
Yeah, yeah. That is fascinating. And that obviously ties into then your whole career since then as well, because you do a lot of mental health stuff as well. Like, I actually put a list together because I was gonna ask you about different parts of your career and different things you've done. And this is the list I have of things you've done. So you've obviously performed as a soloist and orchestral musician. You're a qualified clinical hypnotherapist, the host of a podcast, obviously. TheHappyFlutist.com, that's all you. You're on the board of trustees for the Whirlwind Music Charitable Foundation, and you've worked with Sankyo, Miyazawa, and of course now Trevor James. And I've just found out you're a runner as well, or you were a runner. Have I missed anything?
No. Well, I did my NLP master practitioner with Richard Bandler when it was really new in the early 80s. So NLP, I was really into that. So no, that's really encompasses what I do.
That's just that then. Well, okay, I want to stay on the performing a little bit because I was reading somewhere about an interview and I saw a quote from you saying there was a moment of performance anxiety on a live BBC radio broadcast 1984 which began what has turned out to be a long journey of understanding. Now, you didn't tell us what that performance anxiety moment was.
You're going to do
You're
it,
terrible for this. You're terrible for this. You leave us all these little tidbits and then you just disappear and don't give us any satisfaction. I'm gonna needle my way into this. So, what was it? What happened? You can't do that to us.
Right, Friday night is music night. BBC Radio 2 have this radio show, and they play sort of music from the shows, and they play sort of light orchestral music. And it's in the Maida Vale studios in London. I think it might have moved, but it used to be there. Okay. And in rehearsal, you'd go in the rehearsal, the BBC Concert Orchestra were there, and we went in as the Grenadiers at the back. So we'd do our little bit, then there'd be a soloist, and then the orchestra would play.
Okay.
And the curtains were closed, and it was all fine. We were all in. We weren't in posh. But in the evening, you had to be in uniform, and the orchestra were in tails and bow ties. And the reason is they'd open the top, and it was like the Muppets. There was sort of 100 or 200 older people up there with the audience.
Yeah.
So in rehearsal, I was doing the Carnival in Venice and finished it. And one of the trombone players behind said, hey, right, that was right, wasn't it? You know, that was a bit bloody fast for me. So I turned, thank you. He said, yeah. He said, you're going for a pint afterwards. You know, he was from Doncaster, I think.
Okay.
Which north of England.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, north of England, for people in America.
Honestly, people in America don't bother with Doncaster. Just forget about it. Anyway, sorry, continue. So
the rehearsal finished and we went out and he came up to me, really nice chap, and said, so you do know that there's an audience? I said, yeah. He says, yeah, it's not very big, but I will say that when the red light goes on, you're live to 1 million people. Right. So I didn't think anything of it. Okay. So I go out. I didn't go for a sherbet because I didn't drink because I was a runner, but I think I went for a run, actually. It was a bit of a weird thing to do. But we came back in. They played the first couple of numbers. We played one. And then the announcer said, and now we're going to have Carnival in Venice, performed by Jean-Paul Wright. And the cadenza, I understand, he makes up as he goes along. So this is going to be interesting. And so we started playing. And as soon as we started playing, I looked at the red light. And as soon as I saw the red light, I could hear his voice in my head, you're live to 1 million people. And I weed myself.
Yeah.
I actually literally weed myself with anxiety.
No.
Yeah.
Oh my God. But it was just radio, wasn't it? It wasn't television.
No. So it was only a little one. It was only a little wee, but
That's fine.
But I learned to, I got through it. And I got through the cadenza, which was fine because I as I said, I used to make it up as I go along. But
wow.
Yeah, but we got to the end and the note was fine and everything was fine. But when I sat down, I made myself a promise that I would never, ever let myself get like that again. Never, ever be in that position where I was shaking and that voice came into my head, which was then the reason why I went off and started studying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I weed myself.
Yeah, so was that the catalyst then? That was the moment where you...
Yeah. Yeah, so I managed to get through it. I'm telling you all my secrets here, aren't I?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you really are. Yeah, you really opened it up to me here, and I'm very thankful for it. I have a whole list of questions I want to ask you, but I'm thinking, no, maybe I should just needle a little bit more and find some more stories out of you. We'll just get all them. Let's do story time. We'll all gather around the fire and we'll listen to story time with Jean-Paul. This is great. I'm having a blast. Okay, getting on to the hypnotherapy stuff and all that kind of musicians' well-being and stuff. One thing, there's a lot of details I'd love to go into, but one thing I'm really curious about is how you see the attitude of musicians in general change from back in the 80s to, or even the 90s to modern day with regards to all this kind of stuff, anything in relation to musicians' mental health or well-being?
I don't think there's enough effort put into musicians' mental health nowadays. I think when I was growing up, there seemed to be less flute players around, less stress, less pressure. And I remember when Jimmy Galway did the Rodrigo flute concerto, he was saying he didn't think anyone else would be able to do that. But now you see loads and loads of people doing it. And I think the stress nowadays on musicians to aim for the unattainable, which is perfection, and to be liked, a performance to be liked by the audience, which is based around, let's face it, preference, the preference of each individual person sat there. I think that now wells up so much into huge, great issues within themselves. It was, for me, when I was running, my coach, Eddie Beutler, who has coached the British bobsleigh team, so the sprinters, I obviously wasn't a sprinter, I was a long distance, but he was really into this mental mindset. But the mental mindset for a musician cannot be based around, I'm going to play this well, I'm going to succeed, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, because there's no winning point.
No.
It's all based around how you feel and how you've managed to persuade the audience to feel.
Yeah.
So I feel there's a lot of unspoken angst with musicians nowadays based around how they feel their own performance has gone. I think social media exacerbates all this because people largely put up what they are happy for it to go up, and you don't know all the rubbish that's gone on behind them.
Well.
And I think I think there's a lot of areas that musicians could simply, just like understanding that whatever you do is unique. Your performance is unique at that moment in time. If you're playing a Mozart flute concerto, Jim Dower, up for 6 months, I was on the first 10 bars of, well, it wasn't 6 months, probably about 12 weeks. Dum, dum, da, dum, dum, da, da, dum, week after week after week after week, because I didn't get it right how he wanted me to get it right.
Yeah.
But yet what I was playing was probably valid at that time. And what I think everything people do as musicians is valid.
I agree.
And so I think mental health is an area. I mean, if you look at sports people, they have psychologists with them, performance psychologists. They have help with that. And yet us, musicians, we're unlocking stuff inside our body, inside our head, that is so personal and to some is so traumatic that once that's out, it's really hard to actually cope with that.
It is a huge shame when I see that happen, but do you think it's got worse because of social media, or is it just generally this pursuit of perfectionism that's maybe getting higher?
No, I think social media, whilst it's very good, I think it also leads to a sense of not enoughness. I'm not enough.
Yeah.
That's what my daughter says. We have this sort of social, it's the not enoughness. We're striving for something, but we're measuring ourselves not against Dennis Buryakov, Jimmy Galway, Jasmine Choi, anybody like that. We're measuring ourselves against somebody that's put a video up on Instagram, and it could be a brilliant 10-year-old girl that is playing wonderful stuff. And you think, I'll never do it.
Yeah. Whereas I suppose before you wouldn't have just been exposed to that either.
No, and I wasn't exposed to Irish flute bands until I went over there. I went over there and gosh, I had never heard the technique, the joy and the beauty of a flute band playing stuff that I could only dream of playing. The technique, how the choir was together, and it was just stunning. And for me, social media would have brought that to me earlier. And don't forget, when I was growing up, it was just James Galway on TV or buying his albums, Magic Flute and showpieces.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I suppose it wasn't exposed to it in those times. These days, it's overexposure as well, though. There's way too much. There's far too much. The amount of people I've talked to in this podcast who have said they get genuine anxiety about just posting a video of them practicing on Instagram. It causes them so much anxiety. Like, who's going to see it? What are they going to think? Because again, you wouldn't put it out if it's a bit shite. People don't, which is a shame. Because I think we can anyone who's put a video up on the internet knows, especially your first one, you've probably done it at least 10 or 15 times before you've put one out. While that's not really the way to do it, but we're all guilty of it. The only time I don't do it is with this podcast. This is unfiltered. This all goes out. Can rain nor shine. It's all out there because I can't be asked editing it. That's the main issue. Yeah, this is raw.
And that's unique, isn't it? Because when you make an album, you can keep cutting, you can keep re-recording. A live performance, a live exam, an audition, you can't. It's in that moment. And I think that's what we're losing, the in the momentness.
And that's what music is, essentially, isn't it? It's the moment, it's the reaction, it's the link between the audience and the performer and the composer. Yeah. And it exists at a certain point in time. And live music is the essence of music for me anyway. I think recordings are wonderful, but live music is the real essence. And we do forgive these things in live performances. If I go to see a live performance to the wrong note, I don't give a shit. I really don't care. If something goes the way I didn't like it, I don't care if I'm listening. Because I think, yeah, it's part of it. And you forget about it anyway.
I love wrong notes. It shows the humanity in that musician.
I do. I'm so crazy for it. There's a couple of recordings. I maybe shouldn't say who because I don't want them to find out. But anyway, some of my favorite flute players. One of them did a recording of the César Franck Sonata. And there's a bit where in the fourth movement it's going through all these different tonalities and it's going up. I think it goes up in fourths. Anyway, it goes up in different tonalities. And there's a bit where she forgets to modulate and plays an absolute stinker of a wrong note. The video's on YouTube and it is great. It makes me laugh every time I watch it because you're like, yeah, we know how good you are. You didn't mean to do it. And you screwed up like we all do. We've all done that. And you go, oh, right, if they can screw up, I can screw up too. Also want to ask you about when we're talking about the change in attitude towards mental health and musicians' well-being in the last few years. When you've been working with the likes of Sankyo and Miyazawa and now Trevor James, I'm so curious about that, how you're seeing the market for flutes change and what's happened in that time. Because for me, what I'm noticing mostly is much more of a push towards the hobbyist amateur market from the top brands. I think it used to be like, oh, this brand will make hobby instruments, we stick to the pro stuff. And now you're seeing that bit of overlap. Have you noticed the same thing?
Oh yeah, but that happens in commerce, doesn't it? I mean, if you look at Porsche, they used to only make really expensive cars. Now they go all the way down to Boxster. I think a lot of brands now will sort of drop the market because the market share for expensive flutes is not as big as it was years ago. And it's still, well, if you take America out of the equation, it is the biggest for unit sales. The biggest market is the student, the step up.
Okay,
because that's the most affordable. That is the area that people start on. But I always say, if you start on a certain flute, then you shouldn't really aspire to stay on that same brand. It's like a car, you know. If your first car is a little Ford. You know, if you're really into cars, you don't want to have a top of the range Ford. You want to have a Porsche or a Merc or an Aston or something. You know, you aspire. But ultimately, I think the market is probably been driven. I think it's market forces that has driven these other companies to think we want to share of what's going on down there. We want to link people in so that when they move up into their advanced professional flutes, they stay with us. Whereas previously it wasn't. You'd start with us. There was us, Yamaha. I mean, I started in Yamaha. Actually, no, I didn't. I started on a really old Gemeinhardt. Then went to Yamaha.
Gemeinhardt or the other one? Yeah, they were great.
Yeah. So it was Gemeinhardt and then Yamaha 211, then us, Pearl, and Jupiter. That was that's the baseline sort of around the world. And then people would either stay on those brands on a step up, or they'd float in between brands. And then they would go to one of the big Japanese or American brands. Yeah. But by coming down, I think what these big companies are doing is hoping that you'll get brand loyalty, we'll like what we play, and then we'll go up.
Which I definitely think is the case. I'm seeing that hugely. I'm seeing a lot of brand loyalty come up with that, and it's really cool to see. Like, it's really interesting to see. I don't know if it's cool or not, because also there's the side of you don't want people pressured to stay with the same brand because it is so subjective and your playing can change. But it is nice to see people do it. And one of the things I've noticed most with Trevor James, which blows my mind still, is when I was growing up in flute bands, if you were trying to get alto flutes for the flute band, it was such a pain in the ass. You had to go get funding from the government. You had to get them sent over. If you got the cheap ones, they were pieces of shit. They were awful. And suddenly, in the last 10, 15 years, Trevor James are making alto flutes affordable. And people want to play the alto flute, which 20 years ago, I wouldn't have believed that.
That was my baby when I first joined the company, was that I was in love with the alto flute. And They're all German. I think it's an old German Monig I had, but I just love the tonality. Sankyo made the best, in my view, the best alto at that time. So we designed an alto flute, and for many years we sold it without any profit to get the alto flute out into the market. And it's something that we love and something that we base our sort of business on, which is low flutes. I mean, we're realistic. We can only make to a certain standard. Our wooden flutes take us into the sort of £5,000-6,000 category, but we're not. Yeah. We're not a Paolo. We're not a Brannan. We're not a Muramatsu. We're not a Nagahara. We sit where we sit, and what we learn with our top models, we feed down to the bottom. You should never be told what instrument to buy. Never. You should.
Yeah, you said this, yeah.
Yeah, you spend more time with your partner or your boyfriend or girlfriend than you do. Sorry, you spend more time with your instrument than you do with your partner.
You do.
So you've got to have this relationship with it.
Yeah.
So never be told that, and never let any.
I agree with that. I think it's so worrying when I see I hate the obviously I can't say who because I will get sued for that, but I've seen flute teachers who have said you have to play on this brand. You have to because I play on this brand and you have to. And there's been times where I've been thinking, you're so into that, I am convinced you're getting some kind of commission because there's no way that there's no way you're convinced that every flute player suits this brand. Nobody thinks that. We all know it's very individual.
And there would only be one brand if it was like that.
Exactly. That's what I always say. If there was one brand that was clearly better than the others, we'd all be doing it. And all the top players would be playing them as well. They all vary their playing. So we should too. Actually, I should ask you on that then. As you know, on the podcast, I always ask about Inline G or Offset G. I ask my guests about that. I feel like you're going to have a really good answer for this. So don't even tell me your preference. Weigh in. Give me your opinion on Inline versus Offset G.
Well, I'm Inline.
Really?
Yeah, I'm Inline because, and this was really weird. When I went to Jim Dower, he was Inline, and he said that my fingers were too far over. So my pads of my fingers were too far over, and he said I had a lazy G, third finger. Yeah. So he got me onto an Inline. And I went to George, and George played, believe it or not, closed hole. He played a closed hole flute. Offset G EMEC.
Okay.
And I played George's, and I said, I really like this. And he said, stay with what you've, just persevere with what you got. Because he said, because it's in line, your wrist is slightly further round. And he said, and your technique will be much faster. He said, look at the French style, the French school of flute playing. He said, your technique will be so much better because you won't be flapping your fingers around and you won't have a lazy left hand. So I played C foot open hole Inline for a long time, then went to B foot when I realized that I actually preferred the extra bit, the tonality this extra bit gave me. So yeah, I'm a Inline, old Inline flute.
Okay, so you still have the opinion then that Inline and Offset G, that is still a choice or a preference? You're not in the camp of Offset G is better?
Nope. I think whatever suits you, and take advice from your teacher, because your teacher looks at how you're playing, how you're structured, and how you stand. Yeah. So it's very much a partnership between you and your teacher.
Yeah, yeah. And to be honest, your teacher knows better than yourself sometimes.
Yeah. I will say probably 95, 96% of flutes that we make are Offset G now.
Yeah, I would say so, especially in the UK and American market. From what I see, it's only really France that is sort of holding out on this and staying Inline. I think even Germany's going offset as well. But you know what the French are like? I could say that I lived in France. Yeah. I can badmouth the French. I'm French. I love everything about France apart from the French. Also, right, we're getting through so much stuff here. I need to talk about the podcast. I need to talk about Talking Flutes. Am I right in saying it's been 6 years?
Yeah, probably nearly 7 now, yeah.
How many episodes are you on now?
313. Yeah.
313 episodes. I know what you're going to say. Before you say, I know what you're going to say because you say it in every episode nearly. And I don't listen to it chronologically. I sort of dip in a couple of years ago, I'll jump into an episode here and there. And for the last at least 4 years, you've been saying you want to stop doing it. You want to retire. You want to hang the microphone up. But you're not going to, are you?
I'm very much data-based, analytics-based. As you know, because of my commercial, what I do as managing director, I have to work on analytics. I have to work on data, and for me, data doesn't really work as a musician because you can't measure with data a performance, but you can on everything else. And with podcasting, for me, there's a measurable. So the reason why I said I've been asking people to stop listening is that as soon as I get under a certain point, I can say, we're done. Claire, we're done. And, we'll put out this final little podcast and we'll leave it to the good people like yourself that are bringing in later updates. It's more of an edge. As I said to you when you started, this is the type of podcast yours, the Inline G podcast, is the type of podcast I would have loved to have made if I was younger, wittier, and willing to address issues that are relevant today. And you don't hide away from these issues. You've gone in on the Lefrec argument. You've gone in on the arguments for dangling things on instruments. You've gone into what's happened in New York. You don't shy away from that. And for me, that is a true podcast nowadays. That's what people want. They want something that they can relate to. And you see, Claire and I, we're just two old geezers. Well, she's a girl, isn't she? But we're just two old people. We're, as you said, the Paolo Maldini. We are reliable. We're in the defence. We can pass the ball sideways and we go forward a little bit, but we never go past the halfway line. And the difference with the Inline G is if you look at Maradona or Messi, they're not a problem. They're not a problem if they're sort of messing around in their own half, are they? They become a problem when they're in the attacker's penalty box. And for me, the Inline G is taking the podcast into the attacker's penalty box. You're not shy. You're not shy to address issues. And I think we need that as musicians. We need to know that actually what I'm thinking is relevant. I don't have to go into one of the Flute chat rooms to be shouted at. I think because you're very apolitical in how you do it, you just put it out there, you get people's views, and I think we need that. That is a genuine podcast. It's not sort of a chatette. It's let's be uncomfortable.
I disagree a little bit with that, and I think that's a little bit unfair. First of all, Paolo Maldini was a very stylish player as well. There's a reason I made that comparison. It wasn't just for that. Paolo Maldini was the epitome of class. But also, I feel like, so for example, when I was interviewing Katrina, I was on the bus on the way down. I re-listened to both episodes in the bus on the way down, and all I'm thinking is, I wish I had that control, that poise, really beautifully worded questions, and always calm when you're interviewing. I was like, that is so cool. I don't have that at all. This is very patched together. This is me. Depends what day you get me on. Sometimes I'm drunk when I do it as well. This is the problem. It's much more haphazard, this podcast. While I enjoy listening to your podcast, and I wouldn't listen to my own podcast if someone else was making my podcast. I don't know if I would listen to it as much. I do
the opposite. I listen to yours and not mine.
Yeah, well, there you are. Then we can both agree. But yeah, I think no, don't give it up. Especially no, you have to keep going. Or if you were going to give it up, you could maybe go out with you remember how Parkinson finished? You remember he had his big last episode, and he had George Best on, and he had Peter Kay and stuff. You could do that. You could do a panel show. You can get all the boys on. All boys and girls. You can get Jimmy on. You can get Bayu on. We can all sit together. You get Gareth on, obviously.
Yeah.
I'm going to be there. We'll all have a few pints, and we could go out with a bang.
Yeah, and you'd have to ring a few bells. I love that thing, the way you do. You're short. There's a guy, an Irish guy on the radio in the UK that does. He does a Saturday morning sort of funny quiz show, sports quiz show, and he puts a bell. If somebody gets a good score, that's funny. He rings a bell, and I like the fact that you draw attention to something that is relevant at that moment.
I would love to put in a bell to the show, but to be honest, that's the kind of thing I need an editor for. I can do it. I just really can't be asked doing it. There's mistakes in this podcast that are shocking. I think I put one out the other week where it was 7 minutes longer than I thought it was, and I went back to watch it, and it was just 7 minutes of black screen and dead air. And that's a kind of relaxed attitude I take. And then I looked at it and thought, should I delete that? And I thought, you really can't be arsed. So if anyone goes out and finds that episode where you got 7 minutes of dead air at the end, that's the kind of podcast this is.
But let me take you back to, if I was to go down the road and ask somebody, or go to an orchestra and say, what do you think of flute players? You know, what do they drink? Oh, they're very much wine. They're wine people, gin and tonics. Yeah, no, yeah, I'm sort of largely, you know, we know the brass section of beer. They drink beer and mostly to excess. But you sort of break the mold. You break the mold. You're quite happy to have a bottle of beer when you're talking. And I think the flute world is, you know, it's not one dimensional. We have so many, and that's the important thing, that, you know, it's not all about, oh, did I play that note correctly? Or how do you play the sweet antique? You know, where did you pause there? Where did you take a breath? Whilst that's valid, ultimately, we want to be entertained with podcasts. And that's what yours does. And that's why I love yours.
I think it's a good comparison. I think, like I always say on this podcast as well, because I've had people ask me about this, because there's this one, there's your one, there's also Flute Space, which has popped up recently, Flute 360, and so that's at least 5 that I know of. But they're not in competition with each other, because they're all vastly different podcasts. This is why I always say, like I say to listeners all the time, go and listen to the other ones, because I heard a great phrase about a rising tide carries all ships. If people like one type of flute podcast, they're going to enjoy the other ones, because they're not competitive podcasts at all. They're totally different vibes.
There's no such thing as competitions, because you're putting out in your own words and in your own style how you do things, and it either resonates or it doesn't, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter.
It doesn't. I don't give a shit if people listen or not. I do this for me. Well, no, that's a lie. I do get a real buzz off the numbers. That's a lie. No, I have a terrible ego that needs feeding. No. Right, we have to go on to the fun questions. We have to blast through these. So fun/quick fire questions. Don't panic. I did tell you them in advance as well, so because I'm always very nice about this. But anyway, favorite flute concerto?
Eber.
Yeah. Thank you for giving an answer. Only 2 people in the history of this podcast have actually given an answer. Yourself and Julian Burimo were the only people that actually committed to an answer. Thank you for that.
begs it's so special to me, but the middle movement, I once heard Alan Marion in Paris, take the last bit up the octave. The da 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 da.
Wow.
Take it up the octave. And you think, oh my word. It was absolutely beautiful and in tune. So Eber Flute Concerto.
Great one. Okay, do you remember the first flute album you bought?
Showpieces, Sir James Galway.
Ah, classic. I should start doing a tally this, because most people are picking Jimmy. Anyone who's from the UK or Ireland is Jimmy. Definitely.
Really?
Oh, great. Okay, do you remember the first album in general that you bought?
Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen.
Oh, that's a very cool one. That's a very good. I was hoping for something embarrassing. That's cool.
Yeah,
it's actually
sadly.
cool.
And do you know what? Do you know there's one bit where it's stuck, because it's record, obviously, and it's stuck. So when the needle went round, it stuck. It will not go, but it didn't get go. It will not. It will not. It will not. And do you know, to this day, I still get it.
Yeah. Oh, I know that. Yeah, I know that feeling. That's a great one. Okay, great answer so far, to be fair. This is a good question for you, actually. If you could switch instruments and be as good as you are, what would you switch to?
French horn.
Wow. Okay, you have to give me a reason why, because I don't believe you.
I once heard the Concertstück played by the Chicago Symphony horn section, and it was the greatest thing I'd ever heard.
Okay.
I once heard... not Dennis Brain, another English horn player, Jim Savile. Not Jimmy Savile, but there was a there was a brilliant horn player. I went to hear him. My granddad used to take me to concerts. I went to hear him play. I loved it, and then I heard my first Mahler symphony played by this Concertgebouw with Schulte, and the horn section, the rising horn section, got me to the core.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Yeah, the Concertgebouw have always had a great tradition of superb horn sections. I feel like they're nearly... To be fair, the LSO as well. LSO have always been well known for their horn sections.
They have.
They've had a couple of rocking ones over the years. Definitely the first time someone said French horn. Everyone picks the cello. I'm getting sick of hearing about the cello. Okay, if you could have any career outside of music, totally outside of music, what would you do?
Psychologist.
Ah, good answer, yeah.
It's my love. It's what I've studied over the years, and it's what I'm most comfortable in.
Yeah, even if it was dealing with people not related to music, if the patients were not musical at all.
I prefer that. I mean, I work now with actors and sportsmen, so I prefer that. So yeah.
Great answer. Okay, if you could have a pint with any musician, alive or dead, who would it be?
Bruce Springsteen.
Ah, Yeah, okay, that's a good one. Are you a big Bruce Springsteen man? Big
I,
fan?
I wasn't, but I discovered him only about 20 years ago. And I discovered the lyrics, and I went to see him live at Wembley and was blown away by the musicianship and the story he tells.
Yeah, yeah. And the
Um,
stamina as well. He's famous for like these 4 hour gigs, isn't he?
yeah.
Oh, that'd be a good one to have. And if you went for a pint with Bruce Springsteen, then what would you be drinking with him? Sorry, a drink with him. I said pint. I meant drink.
Oh, I suppose if it was with Bruce, I'd have to drink a beer, but that's not my
Yeah.
drink of choice, because my drink
What is
of
your drink of choice?
vodka and cranberry.
Whoa! I would not have expected. I would see you've got gin and tonic written all over you, but I think that with a lot of English people.
I have, but also if I'm in Europe, it's a Radler's because I can drink
Whoa.
lots of that.
Yeah, Radler's class. Radler's
Yeah.
great. Big man for Radler. For people who don't know, it's kind of like a. It's supposed to kind of like a, what do you call that in England? When we mix it with lemonade, a shandy.
Yeah.
Something like a shandy, but it's much better.
It is. But I have one weakness that those that people who know me know that I drink copious amounts of it, too much of it, coffee.
Yeah, you're a big man for the coffee. Yeah.
Sadly,
And you
yes.
have the red cup, the iconic red cup.
The little red cup, and I'll be sending you a big red cup, actually.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Is
Is the little red cup related to... Oh,
Yeah, it's
it's not related to the Red Sox?
No, do you know? No, I could create a narrative for that, but no, it's not.
I was convinced that's what it was. I was convinced it was all red. This was the theme of red.
I think
That is a bit of a shame. You've broke my heart there, Jean-Paul. I'm not going to lie, but...
no,
right, well, that broke it.
Yeah, so like podcasting, and certainly podcasting the field we're doing, I think everybody should give it a go. I mean, not only will your voice always be there, but what you've got to say, just like as a musician, is valid. There's
entirely.
validity. There's validity in it. And you doing your podcast, you're giving an audience, you're giving a voice of somebody to an audience that they wouldn't necessarily speak to.
Well, I think that's really important. That's also why I'm really strict with, like, the guests coming on the podcast are getting bigger and bigger. And I am getting bigger, like bigger in terms of like classical stars. But I want to keep on the people I find interesting. A lot of the guests in this podcast have been people I've been chatting to on Instagram and going, whatever you're doing is class. Come on. I never want to lose that. I think it's really, I actually love the idea of like local flute players being on one week and then like the principal flute of a major symphony orchestra being on the week
absolutely.
after. I love that.
We can learn so much. You don't have to be technically, and what is the best in the world? You don't have to be.
That's it.
You can learn so much from. Before you chuck me off this podcast, I'll give you some wisdom that my great grandma gave me when she turned 100. So I was about 10, and you know what your parents are like. They embarrass you, don't they? So they had this little party, and my mum said, "Can you go up and speak to your great grandma and ask if she's got any wisdom for you?" And she said, "Well, actually, if I'd known that when I was 90, I had another 10 years left, I would have done so many more things. Actually, if I'd known when I was 80, I had 20 years. No. If I knew when I was 50 that I had my life again, everything would have changed. I would have embraced life much more than I have." And I think what as musicians we have to do is consign the past to the past and embrace now. Embrace the fact that we can change anything now if we want to change anything now. And as my grandma said, when I got to 50, I thought, well, I've got my life again. And I'm a lot older than 50 now, but it's about embracing who we are as individuals, as musicians, as podcasters, in whatever we do, and don't take anything to heart. Just be happy with yourself and don't worry about judgment, because judgment is opinion and it's not valid. There's no validity.
Beautifully put. What a way to end the podcast. That is great. Normally I have to worm my way out of this podcast, and I've got a beautiful epilogue there. That's great. Thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for coming on. You've been someone I've wanted to get on for a long time. I will say, I don't think it'll be the last time you're on. If I ever find myself in London, you're top of the list to get like a pint with and do a proper episode. But it was such an urgent thing for me to get you on some point that I thought, no, we have to get. Also, Bayard Evergoes and my football team are doing so good this year that I can't leave Germany at the minute. So I've got a problem with that. But when they win the treble, then I'll free myself up. But thank you for coming on. And just before we go, I will say, obviously, people can find you on all social media. You're everywhere. Do you want to plug anything?
Not really. I think if they want to find me, they'll find me. It's
They will.
Talking Flutes as the podcast, and TJ Flutes on everything else, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube.
There we are.
In fact, everywhere really.
It's a lot. Great. Well,
this isn't about the brand product. It's about speaking to a good man such as you, who won't donate their football manager to anybody else. But
no, you're not getting Xabi Alonso. No, never. No, you're not getting them. That's a guess I'm going to get on this podcast as well. But anyway, thank you, Jean-Paul. Thank you very much. And I'll say goodbye to the listeners, and then we'll bounce off and have a wee chat here. So, cheerio, everybody.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.